It's great to be here. I can't wait to talk more about this campaign, which is really good to.
Programming. My intention is to bring my experience as well.
I would have moments where I would just not be okay around people.
As a social worker, I have always wanted to impact people and help.
Some of our young people get trapped in that pipeline at 16.
Has a mental health disorder and or diagnosis, when he or she has an episode, like they're not even conscious.
Too, to see, okay, how are we taking care of these human bodies behind bars?
Let's invest in people and not prisons. Welcome back to the podcast. We have the honor and privilege of having Assemblywoman Souffrant Forrest with us today to share with us why she opted to co-sign and sponsor the treatment, not jail bill. So without further ado, I would turn it over to Assemblywoman Souffrant Forrest.
Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Farah, and I'm really a proud sponsor of Treatment Not Jail, and it's a very important piece of bill because I think it really comes at the heart of the issue of criminal justice, which is focusing on how do we care for our people and how do we care for our communities and what public safety truly means. And so I think anybody who's joining this conversation right now recognizes that mental health is a crisis, that the mental health crisis in the United States is spiraling out of control. And today, many of our communities are concerned about what has happened. There's a pandemic, there's unemployment, there's violence, there's jails, and the prisons are overcrowded. And so these issues seem very big and very difficult to tackle. But ultimately, when I visited Rikers, when I was there and I see young men, young women, really coming to terms with some of the crimes that they committed in a space that is unsanitary, unclean. But on the other side, I'm a nurse and I'm stepping into the space too to see, okay, how are we taking care of these human bodies behind bars? I'm seeing that not only do they not have their medical needs taken care of, but literally the mental health portion is not being addressed at all. And we understand that when you're living in communities where there's violence and trauma, day in, day out, micro or macro aggressions towards you just because you're Black, like this causes physical harm and mental harm. And so I'm like, okay, so how are we taking these brothers? How are we taking care of these brothers? How are we taking care of these sisters? And there's nothing. And so when I was approached with this bill, it just made common sense. As the sponsor of Less is More, and, feeling very proud of that piece of legislation that really looked at parole justice and looked at the parole system, and looked at what were we doing wrong on the count of technical violations. What are we doing wrong when we're thinking about how we incentivizing people to get off of this system, do right so you can get out. So it just made sense to pass a bill that's like says 30 for 30. Every 30 days you do good, 30 days you get out. Let's not lock up people for technical violations. But that bill was an end game pill. But here at Rikers, clearly we need to stop the flow of people being put into these spaces. Now, at the time that we're looking with the end of Less is More, we're now looking at the beginning. We have a wonderful mental health court that is being run by a great judge, Judge Demick, and we're looking at also the support that he's getting from our attorney, District Attorney Eric Gonzalez. This MD1 court that's happening in Brooklyn, they're really putting together mental health practitioners, along with people that we trust in the criminal justice system, to create a pathway for people who are suffering with schizophrenia, bipolar, having cognitive delays, being able to see themselves in a space where people are encouraging them to seek treatment. And that's what Treatment Not Jail is looking at. Like, is based off, is modeled after. How do we put social workers, doctors, the person and the judge, along with the prosecutor, the defender, all in the same room? How can we say together, okay, this is for you and we want you to buy in? And so when we talk about the bill, it's got some very important parts, which is one, this is a choice, all right? Of course, the process is of course, there's a whole clinical evaluation that is done to see how this person could really, where this person is at and how they can benefit from the program. But ultimately, it is at the hand of the I want to say patient, because they are here for treatment. It's at the hand. It's at the hand of the patient to really say, okay, I'm gonna buy into this treatment. There's no penalty hang over them. They understand that if they fail, they can try and try again, and they have a supportive ecosystem around them to really help them in the success. And if you've never been to MD1 courts, I definitely want you to go there. It's a wonderful thing to see how people come together for the success of a human being, and it's truly a beautiful thing.
And thank you, Assemblywoman Forrest. I just want to ask a question, because there was something that you just said that really resonated with me. I mean, like, if we take a person that has a mental health diagnosis and or a substance use disorder, and we incarcerate them, and we know that there's no treatment there, and then we release them back into the community, how have we impacted the safety of the community?
None at all. None at all. When we look at everything else that is wrapped around a person that is entering the criminal justice, the criminal legal justice system, it's a traumatizing space. Being in isolation from your family, everything that you know, and you're looking at the people that are coming into it. The bulk of them are young people. You have a 19-year-old, 20-year-old that doesn't even know, doesn't know much beyond themselves. They just getting to understand what their name is, much less what their name means to the world and how they can impact it. And they messed up, right? And so it's really looking at the trauma that happens before they encounter the system, as they move through the system, right? I think 98% of cases are somewhat a plea deal, adjudicated. Like, it's nothing like a real trial, right? And then you're put into this space where you have to decide this or that, but it's never really deciding and everybody coming to the agreement of your freedom or your innocence, or really having a conversation about what brought you here in the first place. And so then you jump into this space in the prisons or jail that is people lying, spending days in intake with their feces around them. Beyond that, when you finally get a bed and you're in general population, you have COs, grueling schedules, no showers that are stink. You have to beg for cleaning products, beg for the medical attention that you need, beg to have contact outside of the space that you're in. And then you really want to say, okay, how can I start over again? And there's nothing or the very little that is there, it's not encouraged, really. Unless you came in with that mind frame. If you did have that mind frame, you wouldn't be here in the first place. But unless you came in with that mind frame, you're not coming out right. If you was okay in the beginning, if you was a little bit off, by the end of this process, you definitely off track. You messed up.
Sounds like a movie I once watched called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, you know, with Jack
Yes.
Nicholson. But again, this idea of public safety, it's like as if we are victimizing people, we're victimizing victims, and then blaming the victims for being a victim and creating a space of transforming a victim into, if you will, a monster, and then throwing them out inside of the community and expecting them to be something other than what we have created in those circumstances for them. And then we're talking about public safety. So how would you look at public safety for someone who has been diagnosed with a mental health disorder that has been incarcerated for 3 or 5 years? And then when they come out, what are they supposed to do?
Well, in the idea, and these are some of the questions that, we have in some part of it, in the implementation of less is more, right? How can we support people outside of the jail cell, outside of the actual facilities? How can we make sure that they come out whole? And it looks at questions like, where do people live, right? I don't know exactly the percentage off the top of my head right now, but the majority of people who come out of state prisons ends up in the homeless shelter, right? How are people eating? If we properly fuel the body, then that's how we then, literally and figuratively plant seeds in people's minds. And so if people can only afford to buy McDonald's or afford to buy processed foods from the deli, because, foods, if they are lucky to get food stamps, they're only getting $81, sometimes $100, $150 for the month. And so what are they eating? And then what kind of prospects are we promising them? I mean, when you have that bid that's tied to your back, you are out, but you are still formally incarcerated. That carries that's a weight that you have to carry around for a long time. And so we have bills that we're trying to promote from the inside to really clean slate, to really allow people to start fresh without this stigma on their back that blocks them from housing, blocks them from better employment, blocks them from training opportunities. One of the things that I'm trying to grapple with is, how do we encourage people to become professionals when our own New York State education state ed allows, ex-felons to be cast aside. I mean, you did the training, why not? Why can't you become a plumber? Why can't you become a nurse? Why can't you become a licensed a therapist? You're trying to move on, but you can't. And so trying to build an oasis. And of course, the other things that, the little things that matter. How do we talk to people who come out of the system? How do we support them? How do we support the families that surround them? There's one nonprofit, the friends and families of the formerly incarcerated, that really provides support for the wives, the children, the friends that are left behind, and how can we provide us and supporting them as they support their incarcerated family and friends. And so it's a whole shift that's required. And it's not just on the state level, city, social, the churches, schools, everybody has to be brought into this process, the shifting.
Yes, I definitely agree with you, Assemblywoman Forrest, that it has to be communal, because again, the reality is when we arrest someone, and they get indicted for a charge, the district attorney or the indictment reads, the people of the state of New York, which is a communal setting. So we need to have that same communal mindset when people are released from prison. The same communal mindset that we had to send them away, we need to have that same communal mindset when they return. And, you know, like I'm all about public safety. And, you know, for me, the best way for us to make the public a safer place is to treat people that have mental health diagnoses and substance use disorders. We need to treat them, not send them to jail. Because when we send them to jail, where again, as you've witnessed yourself, there's no treatment for that. And because there's no treatment for that, they come back out and they basically reintegrate or re-enter the society. And, you know, they go right back to what it was that brought them there. And, you know, again, this for me becomes a public health crisis. And I want to go back to something that, you know, you said a few moments ago, is that this is what we have to do in order to make the public a safer space. We cannot treat people that have mental health diagnoses and substance use disorders as if they are animals and then expect them to come out and be something other than an animal. And we need to treat people with dignity and respect and welcome them back into the community with the support systems that they need, not to reoffend. But we continue to do the same thing, looking for a different result. And for me, that's the definition of insanity.
It truly is. I've worked as a nurse in multiple settings, and my real specialty is in maternal child health, right? But outside of maternal child health, one of the places that I find the most gratifying to work in is actually in a psych unit or in a space where you're seeing people grapple with invisible pain, invisible barriers. It's kind of, unless you've really been there, or have family member who've struggled with mental health disorders, you really don't understand how can someone who seems physically able-bodied cannot get out of the bed get into the shower, or how somebody could be so incapacitated with anxiety and fear that they no longer sleep, they no longer eat, or even sleep. We have people that really are struggling with insomnia where it actually breaks them physically, breaks them mentally. They cannot function. And so I think that when we break through what does illness really mean, right? Someone who is chronically stealing a little bag of chips, you know, committing misdemeanors. It's a function level. We need to ask the question, but what happened? What is making you tick like this? And unless, you know, obviously we could not identify certain things like, well, if you had a broken leg or something. But when we start thinking real deep, we can see that there's an internal mechanism that's off. Then we can start to think like, wow, we need to shift the way that we're dealing with this person. Does this person recognize, are they aware of themselves before they can even be aware of their surroundings? So working in psych, it's always beautiful to me to see. It's beautiful to me to see how through words, through care, through setting examples, role modeling, having time, spending time, therapeutic touch, you could really see how somebody could shift to not even can't even feed themselves to the point where they actually, I think I want to do something today. I want to get up. Let me look for a job. Let me talk to my mother. Let me find a way to connect with my son. It's it's rewarding.
And I totally understand that because I work on a psych unit myself as a peer advocate. So I totally understand and I totally get it. And again, like as you've just so beautifully articulated it, unless you've been there, unless you've had the opportunity to witness it, it just becomes something that we cannot even conceptualize. And like for me, what I think that we do oftentimes when we incarcerate people that have mental health diagnoses, whether they have been diagnosed or undiagnosed, and we just, we take them and we incarcerate them. We put them in prison. It's like taking a 3-year-old child and confining him or her in a cage because they acted like a 3-year-old child.
I had a constituent. One of the common diagnoses is conduct disorder. I don't know if you've seen this, but it's conduct disorder. Basically, it's a type of antisocial. This person really is struggling with this type of diagnosis. They're struggling with authority, but it's really coming from a lack of control of what they feel. They can't control their own surroundings. So whenever somebody comes in to try to, set some tone, set some barriers for themselves, they push against that because they're struggling with the internal controls. Now, this is typically something that you can have with somebody who developed this through traumatic experiences, but then you could have someone who has a psychiatric diagnosis that it goes aligned with this, right? And so what does that look like in person is defiance. It looks like defiance, right? So you put someone who is struggling with this diagnosis, sometimes with another diagnosis on the side, and then you put them in the cell and you tell them you need to wake up at 7:00. That is a setup. It's a setup. It's a setup. I have patients that are like this on a unit, and I know that in order for me to be therapeutic, I've got to set up incentives for them. I have to build a relationship, a trust with them. And then the changes in behavior will follow. But here you put this person behind bars, get up, get there. Don't do that. Don't do that. There is no incentive to get better. In fact, they feel now even more like a caged animal. So what do you have? Bad behaviors. So my constituent was in and out of solitary on Rikers, in and out of solitary. And he was pleading for help by saying things like, I want to kill myself. I want to do this, I want to that. But ultimately, you don't have mental health therapists in the room. You don't have mental health therapists in the room to really address these real challenges of someone who's struggling with what's going on inside, and they're lost humans.
And we anticipate and expect them to come out and be found
like that on their own.
So Assemblywoman Forrest, what would you say to our listeners who are just looking at, people that have mental health diagnoses and they're not being treated, and we're just, our listeners are looking at them and saying, no, they're criminals. They need to be in jail.
I think it's going to be a whole shift. I want everyone who's listening to this podcast to realize that no one comes up by themselves. It literally takes a village. It takes a village. If you really take time to look at yourself, be aware of your faults, your strengths, and then see how society has either helped you or held you back, or not even just society, your family or your job or the schools, about how that has helped you. And then just step back a little bit from that and said, look at the other person and think about those people you knew in your heart. You was wondering how they made it through. Take time just to sit back and look at your own family, look at your friends, look at within your milieu and try to figure out and take you out of you and just think about somebody else. It's not easy, and nothing is black and white. And in fact, the real beauty in life comes out of the gray. It comes out of the mess, the nonsense, the constant, a little chaos. And that's when the beautiful come out. And so when you see someone really struggling, right, to get it together enough to just feed themselves, feed their family, have an impact on this world, have sympathy, have empathy. Beyond sympathy, have empathy. Because it could have been you. It could have been you. And I'm telling you this from a big old assembly member today. It could have even been me. And so when we take out the ego, there's only love and compassion left. Please, please, please do not look at the other as less than you. Imagine if Jesus said that. He was better than us. Then where would we be? And he's the Son of God. So I hope that the person who's listening to this this piece can understand that little piece. And then once you understand that little piece, a lot of things will make sense on why we as advocates do the work that we do. Each in our little circles, why we do the things that we do.
And Assemblywoman Forrest, I just want to, echo again, your sentiments, which you ultimately reflect my sentiments and some of the people that I'm in contact with and some of my colleagues. Our system right now needs therapy. Because I'm in agreement with you. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to heal a village. But when you got a crazy village, then you got a crazy kid. When you got a crazy system, then you got crazy people. So I think, again, we don't need to constantly look at the bottom. We need to look at the top, and we need to have the system diagnosed. We need to have some clinicians come in, diagnose the system, and prescribe some medication for the system. Because the system is what is victimizing over and over and over the victim. The systems is what's failing the actual people that it was designed and created to serve.
Yes,
so
yes.
we need to get some of these clinicians in and have them do a diagnosis on the system, and let's make some changes with the system. And again, I want to thank you, Assemblywoman Forrest, for taking out the time to come and share with our listeners today the significance of supporting and rallying around treatment, not jails. If we want to make the public a safer space, and God knows I want to make it a safer space. I got a 5-year-old. And we need to have treatment for our brothers and sisters who are living with mental illness and our brothers and sisters who are living with substance use disorders. So again, thank you, Assemblywoman Souffrant, for sharing your insights on what it is that we need, the direction that we need to move in terms of getting our brothers and sisters treatment, and beautifully stepping back and looking at it and saying, you know, that could have been me.
Yep. Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to share.
Welcome back to the podcast. I want to just briefly again talk about some of our guest presenters we had here. We had people from various professions. We had a MICA attorney, Jeffrey Berman. We had Casey De La Porta, another attorney. We had people who were impacted by the criminal legal system. We had Michael Gallipo. We had Lawrence Posey. We had William Garland. You know, we spoke to Lily, who is a clinician at Cases. We've had people from several different backgrounds talk about the significance of treatment, not jail. We heard from Assemblywoman Souffrant Forrest, you know, a former nurse who understands the construct of mental health and how it impacts the lives in every facet of our community. We heard from William Eric Waters, a poet, an author, a writer who writes from his experiences. Treatment, not jail, is one of the most significant things that we could support right now to make the community and the public a safer place. We've heard the different disciplines talk about how significant this piece of legislation is. We have Assemblywoman Souffrant. We have Senator Jessica Ramos, who's the sponsor of the bill. Who these are people who understand how mental health and substance use impacts the community, how incarcerating people are impacted by sending them to prison. We heard Justine Centron, a young woman who was incarcerated in a city jail for 6 months before she was able to get treatment. And we heard her talk about the treatment that she got. Watching a TV show one day a week, seeing a psychiatrist maybe once a month or once every other month. And she had to come out and struggle with her mental health disorder and find and seek help on her own. We heard from Hope Sanders, another sister that was incarcerated for, 15 to 20 years as a child. Mental health diagnosis. How many more stories do we need to hear before we come to terms with the reality that confinement of an individual that is suffering from a mental health diagnosis and or a substance use disorder is re-traumatized when we confine them? And when we release a re-traumatized person back into the community without providing any type of mental health services and substance use services, and we just keep reconfining them, what we are actually doing is being an active participant in creating a public health crisis, and we're blaming victims for being victims as opposed to looking at a victim and see how it is that we can help this particular victim participate holistically in the community and the society that we say that we love, we say that we respect, we say that we honor it. And if we're saying those things, then it's apropos that we support this bill. Because again, you've heard it from across the spectrum. We've had not only blacks people, we had white folk, we had Spanish folk. Everyone is impacted by mental health and substance use. Every community. And one of the things that we're going to eventually have to come to terms with is that we need to get people treatment and not put them in a jail and cage them up like an animal and then expect them to return back into a community and function like a normal human person or a normal human being. So support treatment, not jail, and let's move this bill forward, because this is a solution to the fear-mongering that we're experiencing right now, not only in New York City, but across the United States of America. And we can fix this. We have the ability, we have the authority, we have the resources to fix this. Let's invest in people and not prisons.